and founder and director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Volf was educated in Croatia, the United States, and Germany, earning doctoral and postdoctoral degrees from the University of Tübingen in Germany. He has written and edited more than 20 books, over 100 scholarly articles, and his work has been featured in the Washington Post, Christianity Today, Christian Century, Sojourners, and several other outlets. A member of the Episcopal Church in the U.S. and the Evangelical Church in Croatia, Professor Volf has been involved in international ecumenical dialogues and interfaith dialogues, and is an active participant in the Global Agenda Council on Values of the World Economic Forum. He regularly teaches and lectures in Central and Eastern Europe, Asia, and across North America. Tonight, he will be our guide in navigating the good life. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Miroslav Volf.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for this. Where are you? Back there. Thank you for the beautiful introductory words. I'm delighted to be here for the second time on your absolutely splendid campus. And if you don't know how to live a good life being here, how much hope is there for the rest of us? But of course, everywhere we go, we also bring ourselves, and that takes the question back into our own lap of what might it mean at any place we find ourselves, whether beautiful as your surroundings here are, or sometimes difficult and dismal, whether we can have a life that is truly worthy of our humanity. And sometimes this is how I prefer to put it, rather than good life. Because we have all this imagination of what good life is. I remember when we were thinking about good life, and then you can see sometimes Architectural Digest or some other magazines, and it looks like good life is having yachts. Good life is having splendid, absolutely splendid second homes or something of that sort. That's really not what I want to talk about. Rather, what kind of life is it worthy for us to live? Or you can put it this way, as I said earlier, what kind of life is worthy of our God-given humanity? And what kind of world and life are worthy of us as human beings? In a sense, that is the question that I want to pursue very briefly. I won't be able to answer that question. I'm going to give you complexities of the question, as academics often do, but I hope this can be an invitation for all of us to move in that direction. Now, it used to be that the question of what kind of life is worthy of our humanity, what is good life, it used to be that that question was at the center of the curricula of our great universities. When the Harvard was founded, this was at the center of intellectual endeavor. This was not all that people did, but this was central to everything that people did. And it was so for centuries. And it's only in the 70s of the last century that somehow this fundamental human question, which drove intellectual passions of generations, have been gradually marginalized, so that right now that question is a kind of uneasy citizen in our great universities. And the question is, why is that the case? Now, you might be able to get to the question of why if you ask yourself, what has replaced this question? And what has replaced this question is what people call instrumental reason. And by instrumental reason, I mean, or people mean, a kind of reasoning that will allow you to answer a very simple and fundamentally important question. And that is, how do I get from point A to point B? Whatever point A is in your life, personal life, your social life, your economic activity, whatever you do, there's point A and there's point B. And there's how do I get from one to the other. Now, you can say that almost the entirety of our higher education is these days oriented toward different ways of answering that very question. So that we have very little time to ask a question that is prior to that question. And that is the question, which B is it worth getting to? Now, all of us have our own desires, our own wishes, and our wishes, our desires are our kings and queens. We honor them. We want other people to honor them. And if that's the case, then knowing how to get to point A to the desired point B is really the most important question that you can answer, or ask and answer. But still, the question prior to that is just that B and whether your desires suffice to give you an answer to this question. So in this book, Life Worth Living, we think about how we get to the question, what we call the question, is as a bit of a dive. Before you start diving, as I will describe very briefly soon, before you start diving, you live on the plane. And generally, when we live our ordinary lives, we don't think too much about what we desire, what we want. We simply see things. We have certain kind of habits. We do what we do. We desire what we desire. And we go to get what we desire to have. Occasionally, when we encounter a little bit of a bump, then we ask the question, well, what do I want? And then we deliberate, look at consumer reports and whatever else we do, and then we figure out, oh, this is what I want. Then we get what we want, and after a while, maybe we look back at what we have gotten and we ask ourselves, is this really what I wanted? When I was trying to get, is this object what I was trying to satisfy, or might there be some kind of a deeper desire that I was trying to satisfy, which it seemed to me that this object will satisfy. And so you decide, no, I think what I need to figure out is not simply what I desire. I need to figure out what I really desire, what I really want. Now you have narrowed the range, right? Because now you are looking at something deeper, desires that actually are the ones that drive the surface desires that you have. And then if you go a little bit deeper still, then you ask the question, what kind of things are worth desiring? Not what do I desire, not simply what do I really desire, but what is worth desiring? To what it is worthy for me to devote my energy so that I can get what is truly worthy of having. Now this question, what's worth having, what kind of human being is worth being, this is the question that has fallen by the wayside. And I want to illustrate to you and give you a little speech about why this has happened, and I have a little PowerPoint presentation, and I hope this is going to work. Whoa, there we go, it works. So basically, the title of it is The Good and the Consequences of Its Privatization. Hartmut Rosa is a sociologist, and when he was giving a diagnosis of a modern predicament, he wrote, "In a way, we moderns resemble a painter who is forever concerned about improving their tools, the colors, the brushes, the air conditioning, the lighting, the canvas, the easel, whatever is there in studio, but just because of that, never really starts to paint. Now, no good painter will act in this self-sabotaging way. No professional ever will. And yet, when we step out of our work roles, or student roles, if you want, we tend to fixate on means to life, means to our craft, and often forget to live our lives. Life itself turns into a means to life. Now, there are many reasons why we slave away in the prison house of mere means. And one is that we are confused about nature of the good. In our age, the vision of a good has been privatized. And when I say that the vision of the good has been privatized, I mean that it has become simply our private affair. And you can illustrate it with something like this. Say you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life. And then you talk with your friends, and if you have good friends or your parents, if you have good friends and parents, they will kind of look at your life so far, and they would ask you, well, what did you feel kind of compelled to do in life? And then you'll talk about that, but were you good at that? Were you successful? Did people perceive that you were succeeding in that kind of work? You will look your talents, you will look passions, you will look work patterns, and so forth, and you will kind of get a sense of what you might want to do with your life. And then would come the crucial advice. And that crucial advice would be, but just make sure that you pursue your dream. The advice is not, do most good for most people in the world. The advice is not, whatever you do, love God and love your neighbor. The advice is, follow your dream. Now, and you say, well, what's wrong with following my dream? It's interesting. If you put so much weight on desires and dreams, then those dreams, those desires, rules. But as it turns out, our desires and dreams change. And they change because the world is changing, and they change also, and the world changes, because we are competing with one another. And to be ready then for a new dream, what you dream now might not be what you will be dreaming tomorrow. To be ready for a new dream and to win in that race, you need what? You need good tools. The means to achieve those goals. That's why so much of our personal, our collective desire, you can almost call it libido, is tied to the acquisition of economic, of reputational, of bodily capital. By economic capital, I mean money. By reputational capital, I mean from clicks on whatever they are, right? On whatever posts you do, to number of followers, to you counting as being somebody. Bodily capital, you kind of want to look a certain way, right? I want to have some muscles here, straight posture. I'm 67. I've got to worry about not hunching, right? I need to, when I speak to folks like you, I shouldn't be hunched-like. I should stand up straight, right? Bodily capital, which is important for all of us. Now, those are all kind of a means. They're tools so that I can then pursue my dream. But the tricky thing about means is that they so easily turn into ends, into goals themselves. And the best way to see how that happens is to consider money. Now, it will not surprise you if I say that money in itself is worth absolutely nothing. Money is worth only as a means to something else. And just because its worth is in being means to something else, it is this immensely valuable thing that is worth nothing in itself. Because it gives you access to things that you desire. And then suddenly you start desiring money and multiplying money, and this is no longer a means, but is an end. And so it is with know-how, so it is with fame. You suddenly start pursuing it so that you'd be more famous, and not so that you would get to a certain way of pursuing your dream. And so it is with our looks. When I go in the gym, that's what I observe happening there. The kind of the looks, the bodily shape has become the end rather than simply a means. Now, think of this strange painter that I have mentioned at the beginning of my talk. The strange painter's behavior now suddenly starts looking pretty good, makes sense. Or does it? In the, oops, where am I now? What do I, yeah, I've covered this, right? I'm lost. I need to learn some better my means here, right? I'm so busy talking to you about the ends that I'm forgetting about my means of getting that to you. Okay. In grip of her fixation on the tools of her craft, Rosa's painter looks in the mirror and sees her face. But it looks curiously hamster-like. She looks around, and the flat studio walls have curved in on her. The floor beneath her feet is unstable. It is shifting, and she finds herself running just to keep her balance. But for all her running, she's going nowhere. Still nothing on that canvas. Commenting on this phenomenon, John Kenneth Galbraith, economist from the previous generation, has said, among the many models of the good society, no one has urged the hamster wheel. And yet, most of us are still in the wheel. Means are important. Means are, I think, really indispensable. But if you pursue only the means, it will land you in the hamster wheel because you will not know the answer that needs to be, you not pursue the question that needs to be answered before you can know what your goal should be. And that question, fundamental question, is what kinds of dreams are worth dreaming? Or better, what kind of life is worth living? In other words, the B question has to be asked, and not simply how to from A to B. We call that in the book, this question, the big question, the question. That is the most important question of our lives. Why is it the most important question of our lives? We are spiritually free and unfinished animals, human animals. That indeterminacy, us being unfinished and free, that indeterminacy at the core of our being is part of our great beauty. But that comes also with a risk. It opens us to the possibility of failing as human beings, not failing in one or the other endeavor, but failing as human beings. So there's no more important search that each one of us can undertake than the quest for the good life, for the life that is worthy of our humanity. Because in this question, our very humanity is at stake. We can fail in very trivial ways. We fritter away our lives doing nothing of consequence, like when you're scrolling through feeds. And after about an hour of scrolling, say, what have I done with this? Or you binge watch something, right? And one thing is designed to lead you to another, and a certain addiction sets in, and you watch and you watch, and you feel, more you watch, the emptier you feel. That's kind of failing. Accumulated practice of this will give you a kind of fundamental life failure. But we can also fail in kind of catastrophic ways. And this is the lesson of Albert Speer, who was Hitler's architect. There he is with Adolf Hitler. Hitler recruited him before he turned 30 years old. I think he was 28 when Hitler promised to him that if he were to take the job of being the architect of the Reich, that he would be able to design the buildings the like of which had not been seen for 2,000 years. He meant a kind of Roman architecture, which was symbolic of power. And that's what this young man is going to be able to build. And he saw himself, Albert Speer, this is what he writes, I think he writes it to a letter to his daughter. He saw himself as above all an architect. And because he saw himself as an above all an architect, he said yes, and participated in some of the most egregious crimes in history. Singular devotion to his career made him exceptionally good architect, if you like this kind of architecture. I don't, it's not my style. I'm much more modern guy. This is too pompous for me. But, I mean, if you're into this, right, and then Hitler was into this kind of stuff, you will see he could do stuff like this. This was unfinished. But he could do stuff like this and do it really well and efficiently. So singular devotion to his career made him a great architect. But singular devotion to his career made him also an exceptionally bad human being. Even if we succeed as doctors and artists, furniture makers or politicians, we may fail in the big or small ways to live up to the inherent worthiness of our humanity. The answer to the question of means consists of facts. What do I need to get from point A to B? Well, here's what you need to do. Certain facts and skills that you need to have. The answer to the question of goals consists in values. What is the sense of worth that you need to have so as to be able to live life that is worthy of your humanity? And that is a big question. Big question is, how do I determine what kind of life is worthy of my humanity? How do I determine, and I'll now quote Friedrich Nietzsche, where to point the arrow of my life's longing? Where should that arrow point to? Now you might say, well, what I need to do is I need to look deep into my inner depths. And there I will find true Miroslav. What you see now is a false Miroslav, pretending now he talks, right? And he's a professor and giving a lecture on good life. But if you look down there through one another layer, then you will find the true Miroslav. If that Miroslav was in touch with his inner self, then he might determine what it is truly that life looks like that is worthy of his humanity. Then I would be authentically myself. Except that looking down, you end up, what do you end up? You end up, if you look in the well, what do you see in the well? Not something new that isn't your face. You see your face. What you project, that's what you see inside. Or you will find your dream there, but that dream would be an echo of so many things that have been happening around you. And our dreams are very much prone to fashions. And fashions are a kind of contagions, reflexes of a crowd, right? It's not based in some fundamental value. What other people wish becomes suddenly my wish, and I become follower of that, and it shifts and changes, and there's no stability to it. It doesn't give you what's really worth wanting, it just gives you what other people want, and therefore you want as well. Or, the other option is, you might want to consult, for instance, sciences. Psychology might be a candidate, or some other sciences, maybe biology, looking into origins of humanity in order to figure out who it is that we are. Whatever maybe new sciences might be there that emerge just about the search for our values. And yet, when you look at sciences, what they do is they describe what is the case. Now, that may be helpful in figuring out which way you shouldn't go, but it will not really give you values on which you can rely. So where does one turn? So in the book that my colleagues and I have published, and in the course that we taught at Yale, we decided that we need to engage in truth-seeking conversations that are guided by great religious traditions and philosophers. They have been thinking about this question for 3,000 years, more, some of them. Long traditions of thinking about this. They have some experience, and so we can build on that wisdom as we try to discern what kind of life is truly worthy of our humanity. Now, let me, what time do we have? Let me spend the next 15 minutes or so by looking at one particular tradition, which is my own, the Christian faith, and many of yours as well, and ask one of the important questions that we need to ask in order to answer the question, what's truly worthy of my humanity? One of the chapters that we have is entitled Recipe, and which is to say, how do you take different elements, different things that you need to lead a good life together and fit them together? Because various things you can one way to do it is you can treat them as if you are in a salad bar and you say, well, I mean, I like a little bit meditation, so I'm going to take this. I'd like to get, but I really don't like the Buddhist notion of serenity. So I like much more the pleasure. So I'm going to take the kind of the pleasure element from another tradition, say utilitarianism, and so forth. And so you build your menu, but the question is that menu has to somehow fit. If it doesn't fit, you won't have a very good life. I just made, 3 days ago, I made a birthday cake for my daughter. And it was flourless, chocolate cake. Right? Now, I did some eggs ground very finely, nuts, and some melted chocolate, and it was nice little cake. Put some frosting on it, and then what if I then said, I remember, she likes pickles. So let me put some pickles on this thing, right? And then I served that to her, and she would say, Daddy, what's this pickle doing on my cake? Because pickles and cakes and chocolate, flourless chocolate cakes don't quite go well together. So it is also with the ways in which we live our lives. We can put things together in the ways that do not fit. And therefore, you need to have a kind of recipe. But to have a good recipe, you have to answer the really big question. And that really big question is for Christians. Why did God create the world? Are you surprised? This is the big question. It doesn't concern you, first of all, right? Concerns everything else, except, no, not except you, including you. And you might say, well, this is an impossible question to answer. How would I know why God created the world? Nobody was there to see it. And after all, God's ways are higher than ours. I cannot know. And even if I knew how to answer that question, why would that be important? Maybe some geek, theological geek, would like to answer that question. Like any philosopher geeks here? I know one philosopher geek. You're a professor. The big philosophical question is, why is there something rather than nothing? That is the Leibniz big philosophical question. And so you may say, why did God create the world? Is like that question. Interesting to philosophical and theological geeks, but not important for each one of us. Indeed, maybe distracting from really important question. And that is the question, for instance, what do I do about 2.6 billion people who live under $2 a day? Now that's a big question, right? I'll return quickly to 2.6 billion poor in a moment, but I want to ask you a question and me a question. Why do you exist? I don't mean how you came to be born. We all know that kind of stuff. Why do you exist? What is the purpose of your life? Now, Christians and theists more broadly have always believed that we do not choose the purpose of our lives the way we choose an outfit for a party. Or for that matter, for a lecture. I was kind of thinking, is this okay? Should I have a jacket, maybe a tie, maybe a pocket square? Or should I just come more? And I thought, students will be my audience. I can be more relaxed, right? But that's not how we choose the purpose of our lives, right? Why? Because our purpose is woven into the fabric of our being God's creatures. And that takes us back to why did God create the world, us included. And you and I are part of the web of creation. And our human purpose, like flourishing itself, is wrapped up with the purpose of the whole creation. To ask God why God created the world is at the same time to ask how to live rightly and how to flourish in our planetary home. It is to ask, what is your and my vocation in it? Why did God create the world? Why did God create you? There are many answers to this question. I'll tell you one, my answer. And you can find it in the book of Revelation. At the very end, when the whole thing, the story of the Bible is told. Then we have a vision there. John of Patmos is sitting in his cave. I've been recently in Patmos. It's a small, scrunched cave. But he doesn't need to look too far out because he's looking into and seeing heavenly vision. And on this heavenly vision, what he sees is a city coming down from heaven. And then he hears God's voice. God hasn't been speaking for a while in the book of Revelation, silent. At the beginning, God speaks, and then there's only action. God says nothing. At the very end, then God says, describing to John so that he understands what he's seeing. And he says, behold the home of God. This new city, New Jerusalem, new world is the home of God with humans. So the purpose of God's creation is to create a home in which God dwells and we dwell with God together. Now, let me ask you something. And now I'm going to return to these 2.6 billion people. Think about it this way. You have a home, and then you've got a table in that home. On the one end of the table sits the father who is making kind of $2,000, $20,000 a day. Next to him is one rich sibling who is making $2,000 a day. At the other end of the table is a mother and a child. Each makes $2 a day. On one end of the table, gilded silverware, sumptuous food, most expensive wines. On the other end of the table, a pitcher of polluted water, maybe some cooked rice, and they're having a meal. Now, if that happened in your neighbor's home, and you knew of it, what would you think? That idiot. How can he? And the question is directed straight to us. If we live in a single home, God's home, which is this world, then we can't live in a home in which on one end of the table there is extreme abundance, and at the other end of the table it's dire poverty. Now, politics of home follow the economics of home. The malnourished and shabbily clad group, mother and one child on the other side, will look at the other side of the table with longing distance. They're the tribe of Lazarus. And on the other side, they would occasionally glance maybe glance toward the other side of the table, the rich side of the table, but so as to keep them somehow at bay. And pretty soon a wall would be raised separating these two groups, and then each one of them will live in their own area, living in a homeless kind of way, each in different way. One is kind of homeless in a way in which they cannot feel at home because they are in this dire poverty. On the other side, you will have this gilded prison of luxury and false superiority. Some of you have read C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce. You remember Napoleon in that. It is a story where he has his great palace and pacing up and down and blaming everybody for the great losses that he has had. He's got a palace, but he doesn't have a home. Power and money corrupt home. I don't mean power and money, excessive investment in power and money. Because all of us need both money and power in order to be able to live. And yet, excessive investment in it will destroy a sense of home. Now, those are old enemies of home. I want to mention two more very quickly, and then I'm going to stop. One other enemy is what sociologists call escalation. Here's this funny word, right? It means that kind of the speed and the reach of life is growing constantly. By this he means something like this. Let's say in terms of your experience of life under escalation. He says living a life in modern society is like riding a bicycle. If you stop pedaling, you fall. So you have to move, be constantly on the move in order to stay up. But it's not just that you have to be moving, it's that you have to be moving at the speed that others set for you because you're competing with others always. And so you're constantly running, which means that you never have time. The same author writes, amidst monetary and technological affluence, citizens in modern societies are close to temporal insolvency. We never have enough time. No, maybe you here have. This is such an idyllic place. You live in a paradise. You have space. How many acres? 180,000, 70,000? 27, whatever it is. 27,000 acres. And you've got, presumably, if you have space, you have time. Aren't space and time connected? No, I don't know. In physics, but maybe not in the space where Berry College is. So time. And then we also are never really where we are. We always have to be somewhere else, reaching out, because it's propelling us to expand our spheres of interest. When I was a student at the college, we had the president, my brother-in-law. His name was Peter. And there was a joke about Peter, and the joke went like that. What's the difference between Peter and God? The difference between Peter and God is that God is everywhere, and Peter is everywhere except here. Now, might be for us, that was a funny joke about the guy who was jetting all around and never took care of what he was. No, that's not fair. Peter, you're not listening to this. You're a great president. But you understand what I mean. We could make that joke, right? But you can't. And you can't because just by having your handheld device, you also are everywhere except here. You can suddenly soar any place on the planet that you want, and you do. But if you never have time, and if you are never here, how can you be at home? So that these monsters of timelessness, not having time, monster of not being in a place, being tied to the place, ruin also our sense of belonging and our sense of home. I could go on talking about what are these forces that undermine our sense of home, in addition to excessive investment in money and in power. But you get my point. Life that is truly worth living, if it is a life in a space that is our home, it will be a life in which goods of life are shared. It will be a life in which people decide together about future that we will have. It will be a life in which we have time for ourselves or for one another. It will be a space, it will be a place in which we have space to be and enjoy not just the moment, but also the very reality, material reality where we find ourselves. So the big question of why God created the world suddenly told you much about economics, about politics, about time management, about technology. You can expand this in ways that are, I think, very fruitful and very interesting, so as to come to the sense of what kind of life would be truly worthy of my humanity, would be worthy of the world that God created to be mine and all of other creatures home together with God. Thank you very much. I will.
Let's thank him one more time, if y'all don't mind. Can you click? Do you have the clicker still?
Sorry? Clicker?
Yes. Can you just click it 2 more times? So there's a QR code that you'll be able to scan if you want to ask questions to Miroslav Volf. Okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. We can do this. There we go. All right. The QR code is up. If you want to scan it, ask some questions, that'd be awesome. We're just going to go ahead and get started because we do have a question. What made you want to be a theologian and address questions like these?
I was 16-year-old. I was, for a while, a rebellious preacher's kid. And then I actually swore to God that I will never do to my kids what my father did to me by being a minister. It was just awful. And then I'm ordained now, so my punishment, I guess, now. Then I came to faith, and it's not so important to describe how, and gradually started immensely appreciating what my father was doing. But when soon as, after I was converted, I came to faith. I was the only openly professing kid in my school. And prior to that, I was a bit of a popular kid. And so everybody asked the question, why? And so I had to answer, why? And that's what made me into a theologian. I started reading, I started studying, why all this thing, I couldn't read just the Bible, I had to read all the books about science, books about philosophy, books about art, and so forth. And suddenly I was exploring the nature of the world and God's relationship to the world, and before I knew, I became a theologian. This president of the college, my brother-in-law, was about 10 years older than I was and was absolutely charismatic. And he inspired my imagination, and so I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. And so that has been 50 years ago. And not for a single day did I regret having chosen to be a theologian.
Thank you so much for answering that question and sharing your story with us. It means a lot. Our next question is, how do you find optimism in such a difficult world, society that's full of evils?
How do I find hope, I would ask the question. So I come from I was taught by a theologian, Jürgen Moltmann is his name. Read him. Remember, Moltmann. He's very good. And one of the things that he said, that optimism and hope are two very different things. Optimism is based on the current state of affairs, and then I try to understand the dynamics of that state of affairs, what brought it about, and how it's going to develop into the future, and I then forecast what's going to happen. It's like weather forecasting, so it is life forecasting, so to speak, right? If there's going to be a progress or regress, right? And on this account, I can be optimist if indicators are good, the future is going to be better than the present, and if it's not, then I will turn into some kind of a quasi-pessimist or maybe a dire pessimist if I think it will end in some kind of a catastrophe, or if I think, as Schopenhauer did, that it will not necessarily end in a catastrophe, but that the life itself is one catastrophe, which was his argument, right? But if you think that the world, so Moltmann then said, no, that's not how one thinks about hope. The way one thinks about hope is the way Abraham and Sarah expected to become parents of a child. And when God promised Abraham that he will have a son, Abraham believed. Now, nothing in the state of affairs of both Abraham or Sarah was indicative that you could extrapolate from their state of affairs to them having a son, and nonetheless, the son Isaac was born. Now, that's hope. When you believe something, even though it is not necessarily rooted in the reality. Why do you believe? Because it's rooted in a larger reality of God's promise, of God who keeps the promise. So I am hopeful, certain kind of optimist, to use that vocabulary, because I trust in God's promises. I trust in God's promises because God's creation, I believe, is, as creation, even in its brokenness, a good creation. I believe that the good is always more potent than the evil. And therefore, I hope.
That was incredible. Thank you so much for that. We have another question here. This question says, what role does authenticity to the self-play in the life worth living, and how do we step closer to finding authenticity in our nature?
That's a tough question. Because authenticity, I think it's an illusion. It's, I think we're like an onion. You peel one layer, and then you need to peel another layer, and then you peel another layer, and then you peel another layer, and then pretty soon you don't have a real onion down there. You have nothing. All layers have been peeled. Now, is that the good news? I don't know. You seem very skeptical about what I'm describing here. But that's how I think we are. I think we truly are what God has created us to be. We are constituted not by some kind of a core that we have in ourselves. We are constituted by the love of God for us. So my question is not, how do I discover what's really authentically mine? But how do I embrace myself as I am and then try to answer what is God's calling upon my life? Because I find that I have I am myself, not just in myself, not primarily in myself, in some ways not at all in myself. I am in this movement toward God, or God's movement toward me, and my movement toward God. Apostle Paul, this is heavy stuff now. I need a lecture for this, and I have only 2 minutes to give an answer. At one point in Apostle, I think it's 1 Corinthians, Apostle Paul says, he's speaking to somebody who is kind of boasting that they're better than somebody else. And Paul asks that person, why do you boast? Response would be, what do you mean why I boast? I'm better, right? And then Paul undercuts even that kind of answer and asks another question, a rhetorical question. What do you have that you have not received? And the response should be nothing. You want us to practice this? What do you have that you have not received? Nothing. Because everything is created in us by God. So I'm created not as a cookie cutter, one example equal to another. None of us are the same. All of us are distinct, and all of our distinctness are part of the beauty of the creation. And then you ask, that who I am, as I am, what is my calling? And then grow into the calling rather than sink deep down on a deep dive into some true self that will then tell me what I should do.
Thank you so much for your insight there.
I'm afraid it was a little bit abstract, but it's true.
Next question is, in a life full of pain and struggle, how can one better their quality of living a life worth living?
I think that is really a key challenge of life that is worth living, because I don't think our lives are ever, pain is never absent from our lives. If pain is absent in my life, it isn't absent in the life of my family, it isn't absent in the life of my neighbors, it isn't absent in the lives of other human beings. I can't retreat into this sense of my health and then thinking I'm living this good life because I don't experience pain. I have to count with pain not just in my life, but in the life in the world as a whole. The pain of Christ, bearing the sin of the world, was bearing the sin of the world, not his own, not one or two select folks who he particularly liked, but of the world as a whole. That bears upon the life of Christ, life of God, and also is a challenge for us. Now, how do I, in the midst of this, how do I live a life that is worthy of my humanity? Presumably, I do something like this. If I'm true to my calling, I weep with those who weep, and I rejoice with those who rejoice. Sometimes the second is harder than the first. I put an apron, go on my knees and wash somebody's feet. I try to live not simply for myself, but I would try to live for others. Now, if you ask me, do I live like that? I'm speaking in first person singular, I shouldn't, because I don't want to portray myself as an example, but I think that's what we are asked to do. And that's the jewel of life. If I ask, who is it that lived most spectacular life that I know? Francis of Assisi did. He kissed the wounds of the lepers. Why on earth would you do that? So stupidly gratuitous from one angle, right? He endangering himself. What good has come out of it? But can you imagine greater conferral of dignity and attention to somebody who is the refuse of society than that kiss of Francis? Or you have this story also in the Gospels of the widow. Jesus is observing. Nasty of him to do. You don't observe people giving money in the church, right? You never do that. I never do that. When plate's coming, I put my thing, and then I don't look to see whether somebody has put $20 or just one, because it seems like indecent, right? But Jesus, he sits and he's observing, and then he sees rich people bring a lot of money. You know the story, right? And then there's this poor widow. She gives 2 pennies, smallest coin of the empire, and she's giving everything that she had. She's given the most. Now, Jesus praises her, but you think she's foolish. And the church is foolish to receive what she has given, because she's given everything that she has. So why is Jesus praising this? And I think he's praising it because when it comes to truly great love, what is important mostly is not the material effect of loving, but the sheer act of love itself. Have you seen Fiddler on the Roof? Do you love me? Right? They sing to each other. She's, and so what does she say in response? Yeah, for 25 years I've washed your clothes, cooked your meals, I shared my bed 25 years with him. Do I love him? What kind of question is this? And then slowly it gets to the point. Then he says, then you love me. And she says, I guess. What does she say exactly? You know, it's, I suppose. You want to sing it? I suppose I do. And then the following line says, it doesn't make much, doesn't change anything. But it's good to know. I think it's the line, it doesn't change anything, is actually wrong. It changes almost everything. And it changes everything because attention is given to the specificity, to the person qua person. They are held as precious, as important. They are elevated, not some need of theirs. Of course they have needs. But their greatest need is to be the loved self, not to have another layer of better clothes. And that's why the act of love is in some ways more important than the material effect of love. Of course, if you act in love, you'll also attend to the material needs. But the person is the object. This was answer to the question. What was the question?
Restating the question, in a life full of pain and struggle,
Yeah.
how can one better their quality of living a life?
Fiddler on the Roof is description of that kind of life, right? Struggle and pain. And That's the beauty, I think, that at least in Christian account of how things are, that should be the life that we live.
Thank you so much. We have one final question. It says, if it is possible for a person to fail at being a human, how do you define a life worthy of our humanity for those without the capacity to consider the big questions due to age, mental health, or lack of basic resources?
We are cherished as who we are. No matter what our capacities or incapacities are. There's no difference in dignity of the most incapacitated, dependent person and the most brilliant genius, most successful athlete. You put after most anything you want. There's absolutely no difference. But nonetheless, each one of us, to the extent that we can orient our lives toward the good. And to the extent that we orient our lives toward the good, we will live worthy of our humanity. If we don't, we will fail our humanity. Now, this is not about, for me, I'll put my cards on the table, this is for me not about whether you end up in heaven or in hell. This is not about eternal destiny. This is about our earthly lives.
Everyone, once again, let's give Miroslav Volf a round of applause. All right, before you leave, we have a couple announcements. If you are here for the C credit, please check out because you won't get the C credit if you don't. We have also, the last announcement, in the back corner over there, we are selling 2 of Miroslav Volf's books. The first one is called The Home of God, which he mentioned in his talk. And then also, we are selling the book, which was on the screen. It's called Life Worth Living. I encourage you to check both those out. And thank you guys for coming, and have a great rest of your night.